A security guard kicks out a teen for no reason, only to find out moments later that he just made the biggest mistake of his career. What happens next will shock you and leave you questioning everything. Before we start the story, comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. It was a Saturday afternoon when Malik walked into the mall. He was a 17-year-old high school senior, a bit tall for his age, with a laid-back attitude and headphones around his neck. He wasn't dressed in anything special, just jeans and a hoodie. But there was something about his presence that caught Jake's eye. He had seen countless kids pass through the mall, but something about this one didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the way he looked around, or maybe it was the fact that he wasn't headed to a store or food court like most people. Whatever it was, Jake's gut told him to keep an eye on Malik. Jake had always prided himself on being vigilant. In his eyes, his job was to keep the mall safe and make sure everyone followed the rules. Over the years, he had learned to trust his instincts when something felt off. But on that day, his instinct was wrong. Malik wandered casually through the mall, not doing anything suspicious, not causing trouble. He was just a kid out for a Saturday stroll listening to music, but Jake's assumptions clouded his judgment. He didn't stop to think about why the teenager was there, or whether he might just be a regular customer. Instead, Jake walked up to him with the authority of someone who had seen it all. "Hey, you, I need to see your ID," Jake said sharply, his voice full of suspicion. Malik pulled the headphones from his ears, a bit confused. "What? Why? I'm just walking around." Jake's face was stone cold. "I said, show me your ID. You're not supposed to be here if you're not shopping." Malik frowned, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean? I'm just looking around. I'm not doing anything wrong." Jake wasn't listening. In his mind, the kid was up to something. He had to be. The way Malik looked, the way he was walking, Jake didn't trust him, and in that moment, something snapped in his mind. He assumed the worst. "I told you to leave," Jake said, now more aggressively. "You don't belong here. Get out before I call security." Malik's confusion turned to frustration. "What are you talking about? I'm just here to chill. I'm not causing any problems." But Jake wasn't having it. His mind was made up. He motioned toward the exit, his tone growing more demanding. "I'm serious, kid. You need to go now. I'm not going to say it again." Malik, feeling completely out of place and unfairly treated, finally turned around and began walking toward the door. His heart was racing now, not because he was afraid, but because he couldn't understand why he was being kicked out for no reason at all. What had he done wrong? He had done nothing but walk into the mall like everyone else. As Malik left, he shook his head, still in disbelief. But Jake was already turning back to his usual rounds, feeling proud that he had done what he thought was his duty. The whole situation seemed so simple to him. A kid who didn't belong, an easy decision to make. He didn't even realize that he had just made one of the worst mistakes of his career. Little did he know, just minutes later, everything was about to change, and the consequences of his decision were going to hit him harder than he could ever imagine. Jake had barely finished his rounds when his phone buzzed on his belt. He glanced at the screen and saw it was a call from his supervisor, Mr. Mitchell. His stomach dropped a little. Mr. Mitchell wasn't the type to call unless something serious was going on. "Jake, what's going on? Why did you just kick out Malik Johnson?" Mr. Mitchell's voice was tight, almost angry. Jake froze for a moment, confused. "Malik Johnson? The kid I just sent out?" "Yes, the same one," Mr. Mitchell snapped. "What the hell were you thinking? You've got no idea who that is, do you?" Jake's mind raced. Who could this kid be? He hadn't recognized him from any of the mall's regulars, but that didn't mean much. He had seen all sorts of people come and go. I'm not sure, I just saw him walking around looking suspicious, so I asked for his ID." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Mitchell spoke again, his tone had changed, almost like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Jake, that's Malik Johnson. You just kicked out the son of the owner of this entire mall." Jake's breath caught in his throat. Wait, what? He stammered. The owner's son? Are you serious? Yes, I'm serious, Mr. Mitchell snapped. Malik's father owns this mall. He's been a loyal client of ours for years. And now you've just gone and humiliated his son in front of everyone. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He had no idea. He thought about how he had treated Malik, how quickly he had judged him. His chest tightened, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. What had he done? How could he have been so wrong? As Mr. Mitchell continued to scold him, Jake could barely concentrate. His mind was spinning. He had just kicked out someone who was more important than anyone he had ever seen in the mall. The thought of it made his blood run cold. But it wasn't over. He could hear Mr. Mitchell's voice even sharper now. You need to find Malik, apologize, and get him back in here. The owner is on his way to the mall right now. You're going to have to explain this mess to him. Jake's hands shook as he ended the call. He stood there for a few seconds, frozen, trying to process what he had just learned. The son of the owner. He couldn't believe it. He had treated him like any other random teenager, assuming the worst. And now the owner of the mall was coming here, probably furious to confront him. He had no idea what to do. Jake's heart raced as he stood in the security office, replaying the conversation over and over in his mind. Malik Johnson, the owner's son. How had he missed that? Why hadn't he asked more questions instead of jumping to conclusions? He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants, feeling the weight of the mistake pressing down on him. He knew the owner, Mr. Johnson, only by reputation. The man was powerful, respected, and wealthy. He didn't just own the mall, he owned several businesses around the city. People around the mall spoke about him with a mix of admiration and fear, but no one dared to cross him. And now Jake had made one of the biggest mistakes of his career. As if on cue, the doors to the security office swung open, and one of the other mall staff members rushed in, looking panicked. Jake, Malik's father is here. He's in the lobby and he looks mad. Jake felt his stomach drop. Shit, he muttered under his breath. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Any minute now, Mr. Johnson would arrive, and Jake would have to face the consequences. There was no escaping this. He couldn't undo what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, he could salvage whatever dignity he had left by apologizing and taking responsibility. But even as he thought about it, Jake knew it wasn't going to be easy. How could he explain his actions to someone like Malik's father? How could he justify treating his son like a criminal when he had no idea who he really was? The more he thought about it, the worse it seemed. It was a mistake so huge, he wasn't sure an apology would even be enough. A few minutes later, Jake's supervisor, Mr. Mitchell, walked in, his face stern. Jake, you're going to have to go out there and face Mr. Johnson. He's looking for you. Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. I know, he said quietly. Mr. Mitchell looked at him with a mixture of frustration and pity. Listen, Jake, I don't know what you were thinking, but you need to fix this. The owner isn't going to take kindly to being disrespected, especially not over something like this. So just go out there and do your best. Try to make it right. Jake nodded, though he didn't feel reassured. He stood up from his chair and walked out of the office, his legs heavy, each step feeling like it might be his last as a security guard at the mall. When he reached the lobby, he saw Mr. Johnson standing by the entrance, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. He was tall, well-dressed, and had an air of authority that made Jake feel small in comparison. Jake approached hesitantly, trying to steady his breath. Mr. Johnson, I'm really sorry, I didn't realize. But before he could finish, Mr. Johnson turned to face him, his cold eyes locking onto Jake's. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. You didn't realize what, Jake? That you just kicked my son out of my mall? That you treated him like a criminal when all he was doing was walking around? Jake's mouth went dry. He had never felt so exposed. I made a mistake, Jake stammered. I shouldn't have assumed anything. I was wrong, and I'm really sorry. Mr. Johnson stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could feel every second stretch out like an eternity. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Mr. Johnson spoke, but his voice was calm, too calm. You've made a huge mistake, Jake. You've embarrassed my son, and I don't take that lightly." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of Mr. Johnson's words, each one heavier than the last. "I understand, sir. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll apologize to Malik. I just didn't know." Mr. Johnson cut him off, his voice suddenly sharper. "You didn't know? How about asking a few questions before making a decision? How about treating people with some respect instead of assuming the worst based on how they look?" Jake nodded quickly, realizing that no words could undo the damage he had caused. "You're right, I should have asked. I don't care about excuses," Mr. Johnson snapped, stepping closer to him. "What I care about is making sure something like this never happens again. You've made a fool of yourself, and now you're going to have to live with the consequences." Jake's stomach turned. He had no idea what those consequences would be, but the way Mr. Johnson was looking at him made it clear. Nothing would be the same after today. Jake stood there, completely frozen, as Mr. Johnson's sharp gaze bore into him. Every word the man spoke felt like a heavy blow, one that Jake had no way to dodge. His mind raced, trying to think of something, anything, that might ease the tension in the air, but nothing came to him. I'm truly sorry, sir," Jake repeated, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean to cause any harm. I was just doing my job. I should have asked more questions. I shouldn't have made assumptions." Mr. Johnson didn't seem to soften at all. Instead, he shook his head slowly, his expression hardening further. "Assumptions," he muttered. "You assumed my son didn't belong here because of the way he looked, right? Because that's exactly what you did, Jake. You looked at him, judged him, and decided he wasn't worth your time to even ask who he was." Jake's chest tightened. He could feel the shame creeping in, burning hotter with each passing second. It was true. He had judged Malik based solely on his appearance, without giving him the respect every person deserved. The worst part was Jake knew he had done it before to other people, but this time was different. "You don't get it, do you?" Mr. Johnson continued, his voice rising now. "This isn't just about some random kid you threw out. This is about respect. You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't just because they don't look like you think they should. My son wasn't causing any problems. He wasn't even doing anything wrong." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? That he was sorry, that he would never make that mistake again. But even if he promised to change, would it make a difference now? "Do you know how hard it is to raise a kid like Malik in a world like this?" Mr. Johnson's voice softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of pain creeping in. "He's a good kid. He doesn't deserve to be treated like that. Nobody does." Jake felt a pang of guilt. For a moment he thought about his own family, his younger brother, his friends. He wondered if they would feel the same way if he was treated the way Malik had been. Maybe it wasn't just about the job. Maybe it was about understanding people, seeing them for who they really were, not what he thought they were. Mr. Johnson exhaled sharply, his shoulders tense. "I'm not going to fire you, Jake. I'm not like that. But there are going to be consequences. You've embarrassed my son in front of the entire mall. Do you understand how that feels?" Jake nodded, his throat dry. "I understand. I'm really sorry for what I did. I'll do anything to make it right, I swear." Mr. Johnson stared at him for a long moment, the silence hanging between them like a heavy cloud. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, though no less firm. "You'll go to Malik. Apologize properly. You're going to make sure he knows that this never should have happened. You're going to take responsibility for your actions. And then, we'll see if there's anything more that needs to be done." Jake's heart was racing. "Yes, of course I will. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll apologize to him, and I'll make sure he knows how sorry I am." Mr. Johnson gave him one last intense look. "I hope you mean that, because if this ever happens again, you won't get another chance." Jake nodded again, his hands shaking. "I won't let you down. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this." As Mr. Johnson turned and began to walk toward the exit, Jake stood motionless, trying to process everything that had just happened. He had made the biggest mistake of his career, and the consequences of that mistake were only just beginning to unfold. The shame he felt was overwhelming, but it was also a reminder. He couldn't let this define him. If he truly wanted to learn from this, he needed to make things right, starting with Malik. It wasn't over yet. Jake didn't waste another second. The weight of Mr. Johnson's words hung over him like a storm cloud, but now he had to act. He had to find Malik, apologize, and hope beyond hope that the teenager would accept his apology. He wasn't sure how Malik would react. Would he be angry? Would he just walk away and never speak to him again? Jake could already feel the tension building in his chest. He quickly made his way to the mall's food court, the place where most of the teenagers hung out on weekends. His eyes scanned the area, looking for Malik. He wasn't there. Neither was he by the escalators or near the fountain where teens usually like to gather. Panic started to set in. What if Malik had already left? What if he couldn't find him before Mr. Johnson came back? Just as Jake was about to turn and head to the parking lot to search for him, his phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket, praying it wasn't another call from Mr. Mitchell or, worse, Mr. Johnson. It was a message from Mr. Mitchell. "Malik's in the store near the entrance. Go now." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't waste time. He turned on his heel and headed straight for the entrance, his mind racing. Malik's in the store. Malik's the owner's son. Malik has every right to be pissed at me right now. As he approached the store, he spotted Malik through the glass door. The teenager was standing near the counter, speaking to a cashier, looking completely calm, as though nothing had happened. But Jake knew better. Deep down, he knew that Malik was probably seething on the inside, even if he wasn't showing it. He had just been humiliated in front of a security guard who, for no reason at all, had decided he didn't belong. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves before entering. He pushed the door open and walked in, his footsteps almost too loud in the quiet store. Malik glanced up, his expression unreadable at first. There was a flicker of recognition, and then, without saying a word, Malik turned back to the counter, clearly not interested in acknowledging him. "Malik," Jake said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Malik, I need to talk to you." Malik didn't respond immediately. He finished up whatever he was doing with the cashier and then turned to face Jake, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't seem angry, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made Jake's stomach churn. Malik was a teenager, but he didn't look like one at that moment. He looked like someone who had just been let down by the people who were supposed to treat him fairly. "Look, I know I messed up," Jake began, his voice trembling slightly. "And I know no apology is going to fix what happened. But I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed anything about you. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." Malik stared at him for a long moment, his silence making Jake even more uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, unsure of how to continue. "I'm not making excuses for what I did," Jake went on, his words coming faster now. "I was wrong. I judged you based on how you looked, and I should have known better. Nobody deserves to be treated like that, least of all you." Malik's eyes narrowed slightly, but still, he didn't say anything. The tension in the air was thick. Jake was starting to feel the sting of regret more acutely now, realizing just how badly he had messed up. The kid didn't even know him, and yet Jake had just decided without a second thought that he didn't belong there. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you were the owner's son," Jake said, almost like he was trying to justify his actions. But he stopped himself, realizing that it didn't matter. "That doesn't change the fact that I treated you unfairly. I'm sorry, Malik. I hope you can at least understand that I didn't mean to cause you harm." Malik finally spoke, his voice flat but heavy with emotion. "You didn't care who I was, did you? You saw me, judged me, and just decided I didn't belong. You didn't even give me a chance." Jake winced at the words. It was the truth. He hadn't given Malik a chance. He had been so quick to assume, so quick to act, without even thinking about what that would do to someone else. "I know," Jake whispered, looking down. "I didn't. And I'm sorry." There was a long silence. For a moment, Jake thought Malik might walk away without saying anything more, leaving him with nothing but his guilt. But then, to his surprise, Malik spoke again, this time softer. "I'm not going to forgive you just like that," Malik said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge to it. "But I'm willing to hear you out, just don't ever do that again, to me or anyone else." Jake nodded vigorously. "I swear, I won't. I've learned my lesson. And I promise you, Malik, I will never judge someone like that again." Malik studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. "Good. You should." Jake stood there for a moment, feeling the tension in the air start to loosen, just a little. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Malik wasn't throwing his arms around Jake and calling him a friend, but at least he was willing to listen, to hear him out. And that was a start. Malik turned back to the cashier without saying another word. Jake, though, stayed standing for a few moments longer, realizing how much his actions had cost him. He had made an assumption about a person he knew nothing about, and in the process he had lost more than just his dignity. He had lost the trust of someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way. The next few days at the mall were going to be difficult, but Jake knew that he had taken the first step toward making things right. He hoped it would be enough to prove that people could learn from their mistakes, even the biggest ones. The days that followed were tense for Jake. He had apologized to Malik, but he knew that saying sorry wasn't enough. He had broken a trust, one that wasn't going to be so easily fixed. Jake kept replaying the encounter in his mind, trying to figure out if there was something more he could have done. Did I really say the right things? Did he believe me? Every time he walked through the mall, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the mistake still hanging over him. The awkwardness with his coworkers was palpable, and he could sense the whispers whenever he passed by. The whole thing had become more than just a personal failure. It was now something that everyone in the mall had heard about. How could it not be? The son of the mall's owner had been kicked out by the security guard. It was the talk of the staff room, the gossip around the food court. Jake had tried to keep his head down, focus on his work, but it wasn't easy. Every conversation felt strained, every moment a reminder of how he had misjudged Malik. But the real test came when Mr. Johnson's words echoed in his mind. "If this ever happens again, you won't get another chance." Jake knew that he had to show he could learn from this, that he was capable of doing better, and that the mistake wasn't something that defined him. But every interaction with Malik felt like walking on eggshells. The teenager had kept his distance, but it wasn't out of anger. It was more like a quiet reminder to Jake that this wasn't something that could be brushed off with a simple apology. One afternoon, just as Jake was finishing up his shift, Malik walked into the mall again. Jake spotted him near the entrance, this time walking with his friends. The group of teens were chatting and laughing, looking completely at ease, as if the whole incident had never happened. Malik caught Jake's eye briefly and gave him a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jake hesitated for a moment, then approached him, his heart beating faster than it should have been. "Malik," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Can we talk for a minute?" Malik looked up from his group, pausing for just a second before he nodded. "Sure, what's up?" Jake felt the old tension rising in his chest again, but he pushed through it. "I just wanted to say, again, that I'm sorry. I know I've already said it, but I want you to know it wasn't just about getting in trouble. It wasn't just about me losing my job or facing Mr. Johnson. It was about me realizing how wrong I was to judge you the way I did." Malik raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, you've been thinking about it a lot, huh?" "I have," Jake admitted, "and I'm not proud of what I did. I really messed up, and I know that now. But I want you to know that I've learned from it. I won't make that mistake again, Malik. Not with you or anyone else." Malik glanced at his friends, who were still hanging back a little, watching the conversation unfold. Then he looked back at Jake. "I know you've learned your lesson," Malik said, his tone flat but not unkind. "But trust me, you're not the only one who learned something from this." Jake blinked, not sure if he was hearing right. What do you mean? Malik shrugged, his voice now taking on a more thoughtful tone. I learned not to judge people either. I should have known better than to assume that you were just a security guard doing his job. I didn't give you the benefit of the doubt either. Maybe I should have talked to you before I got all defensive. Jake was taken aback. He hadn't expected Malik to say that. Malik was apologizing too? No, Malik, Jake said quickly. You didn't do anything wrong. You had every right to be upset. I was the one who messed up. I know, Malik replied, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. But I guess the point is, we both had a part in it, right? You jumped to conclusions and I judged you too. It's easy to assume things when you don't really know someone. Jake nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief flood over him. For the first time since the incident, it felt like the weight was lifting. Maybe there was a chance for both of them to move on from this. I appreciate you saying that, Jake said, his voice quieter now. I really do. It means a lot to me that you're giving me another chance. Malik gave him another brief nod, his expression softening just slightly. Yeah, well, I guess we all have some work to do. You're not perfect, and I'm not either. But we can get it right next time. Jake felt a sense of understanding between them, something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about fixing the mistake. It was about recognizing their shared humanity, seeing each other beyond assumptions and judgment. As Malik turned to walk back to his friends, Jake stood there for a moment, watching him go. He felt a strange sense of gratitude that Malik had been willing to let him try to make things right, and even more so, that they both had learned something important from the experience. It wasn't over. There would always be work to do, always room to grow. But for now, this small step forward felt like a victory. He had learned his lesson, and maybe, just maybe, Malik had too. The next few days passed slowly for Jake. The incident with Malik and his father still weighed on his mind, but things around the mall were starting to feel just a little bit more normal. The tension that had been hanging in the air seemed to ease, though Jake knew it wasn't gone entirely. People had seen what happened. They knew. And Jake couldn't escape the fact that his reputation had taken a hit. Yet, there was a strange sense of relief in the way Malik had handled things. The teenager hadn't been quick to forgive, but he'd also shown a level of maturity that Jake hadn't expected. For the first time in weeks, Jake began to feel like he was making real progress. Not just at work, but in himself. Maybe he wasn't perfect, but at least he was learning to be more careful, more open, more willing to see beyond his initial assumptions. The mall's usual hum of activity continued around him, but Jake couldn't help but notice how different everything seemed. It wasn't just about the job anymore. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had learned something far more important, something about himself. It wasn't enough to just do his job. He needed to do it right, with respect, with fairness, and without the bias that had clouded his judgment that day. And that meant looking at everyone, no matter who they were, as equals, not as strangers to be judged at a glance. One afternoon, as Jake made his rounds near the food court, he spotted Malik again. This time he was sitting with his friends, laughing and joking like any other teenager. For a brief moment, Jake considered walking past and keeping to his duties. He wasn't sure what would happen if he approached Malik again, especially after everything that had transpired. But then Malik looked up, their eyes meeting. To Jake's surprise, Malik gave him a small nod, one that almost seemed like a silent acknowledgement of their past conversation. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Jake feel like maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to return to normal. Jake walked over, cautiously at first, not wanting to overstep his boundaries. "Hey, Malik," he said, keeping his tone casual, trying not to make it awkward. Malik looked up from his friends and smiled. Just a small, genuine smile that seemed to ease the tension between them. "Hey, Jake," he replied. "What's up?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "I just wanted to thank you, for what you said the other day, about both of us learning from this." Malik shrugged slightly, his smile still there, but more relaxed now. "No problem. I just thought it was important. You know, for both of us to see the bigger picture. Jake nodded. I appreciate that. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I don't think I can really ever make up for it. But I want you to know that I'm doing my best to be better. Malik leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. I get it, he said slowly. You don't need to keep apologizing, man. I'm not holding it against you anymore. We all mess up sometimes. You're not the only one who learned something from this. Jake was taken aback by the simplicity of Malik's response. Here he was, a teenager who had been unjustly thrown out of a mall, yet he wasn't holding a grudge. In fact, he seemed almost forgiving. Jake had expected more anger, more resentment. But what he got instead was something more mature, something Jake hadn't anticipated. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it up to you for what I did, Jake said, his voice quieter now. But I hope you know I'm really sorry. Malik met his eyes, nodding slowly. I know, and like I said, I'm not mad anymore, just don't forget what you learned. Jake smiled, relieved. I won't forget. With that, Malik turned his attention back to his friends, but not before giving Jake one last glance, this time a bit warmer than before. It wasn't the kind of apology or forgiveness Jake had been expecting. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple, straightforward, and for some reason, it felt more real than anything else could have. Jake lingered for a moment, taking it all in. He felt lighter than he had in days, maybe even weeks. The weight of his mistake hadn't disappeared completely, but it didn't feel as crushing anymore. Malik's forgiveness, in its own quiet way, had given him the chance to move on, to prove that he could learn, grow, and change. As he walked away, back to his post, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how much the experience had changed him. Sure, he was still the same security guard, still just doing his job, but now he felt like he was doing it with a little more understanding, a little more respect. The lessons he had learned went beyond what he could do to fix his career or his reputation. They were about how to see people, not just with his eyes, but with his mind, with his heart. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was actually becoming the kind of person he wanted to be. And that, he realized, was worth more than any job or any mistake. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. The days continued to roll on, and while things had started to settle down at the mall, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was still walking a fine line. His interactions with Malik, though cordial, still carried a weight. He knew the teenager hadn't fully forgotten the incident, nor should he have. But there was something different now, something more mature in their exchanges. The tension had eased, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. Jake's job had become more than just about patrolling the mall or making sure things stayed safe. It was about more than simply showing up and doing what was expected. He had learned that he needed to listen, to not just watch people, but to understand them, to give them the respect they deserved. It had taken a huge mistake for him to realize this, but now, every interaction he had, whether with a customer, a mall employee, or even Malik, was filled with a new sense of awareness. One afternoon, as Jake was taking a short break in the security office, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mr. Mitchell, his supervisor. Mr. Johnson wants to speak with you in the office. Now, Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had been doing everything he could to make things right, but the idea of facing Mr. Johnson again, especially after everything that had happened, made him nervous. He stood up quickly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle back into his shoulders. He walked down the hallway to the office, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached the door, he knocked lightly before entering. Mr. Johnson was sitting behind his desk, his face unreadable as he glanced up at Jake. "Jake," he said, his tone neutral but firm, "sit down." Jake sat across from him, his palms suddenly clammy. He wasn't sure what to expect. Was Mr. Johnson going to fire him? Would there be further consequences for what he had done? Or was this another conversation about the mistake he had made, one that hadn't been fully forgiven yet? Mr. Johnson studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I've been keeping an eye on things, Jake. I wanted to talk to you about the way you handled the situation with Malik. Jake felt his stomach tighten. I know I messed up, sir, he said quickly, the words coming out almost too fast. I've learned my lesson. I've been doing everything I can to make it right. Mr. Johnson held up a hand, cutting him off. Jake, I'm not here to berate you. I'm not here to tell you how wrong you were. You already know that. What I want to talk about is how you've been handling things since, and how you've been handling Malik. Jake blinked, confused. I don't understand, sir. You see, Mr. Johnson continued, his voice steady, I've noticed something. You've made an effort, a real one, to change the way you interact with people. And I respect that. I've seen how you've treated Malik, and I can tell you've been trying. He's noticed it too. I appreciate that you're taking responsibility for your actions, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. Jake sat there in shock, his mind racing. Wait, are you saying... Mr. Johnson nodded. What I'm saying is, I've seen the difference. I've been watching how you've handled things, and I think you've learned something valuable. Everyone makes mistakes, Jake, but it's how you handle those mistakes that counts. Jake let out a slow breath, feeling the tension begin to ease. He wasn't about to assume that everything was completely fixed, but hearing Mr. Johnson speak this way gave him a sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to move forward. I appreciate you saying that, sir, Jake said, his voice quieter now. I've been trying to prove that I can learn from my mistake, that I can be better. You've done that, Mr. Johnson said, his voice still firm but softer now. But there's one thing you need to remember. This job isn't just about following the rules. It's about respect. And I think you've learned that the hard way, but you've learned it. So, I'm going to give you a second chance. Jake was speechless for a moment. He hadn't expected this kind of conversation. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I won't let you down. Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Just keep doing what you're doing, Jake. Keep listening, keep being fair, and keep treating people like you'd want to be treated. I think you'll do just fine. Jake nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. I will. I promise. As Jake left the office, his mind was still spinning from the conversation. He had expected consequences, maybe even the loss of his job, but instead, Mr. Johnson had given him something far more valuable. The opportunity to prove that he could be better, that he could change. He walked back to the security office, his head held a little higher. He knew he had a long way to go, but today, he had taken another step forward. The mistake he had made would always be a part of him, but it didn't have to define him. He wasn't the same person he had been when he kicked Malik out of the mall, and he wasn't going to make that mistake again. It wasn't just about keeping his job anymore. It was about becoming the kind of person who truly understood the value of respect, and about making sure everyone, no matter who they were, got the chance to be seen for who they truly were. The following weeks felt like a turning point for Jake. After his conversation with Mr. Johnson, something shifted inside him. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. Every decision he made, every person he interacted with, felt different. He'd spent so many years just doing his job without thinking much about the people he was supposed to protect, the people he was supposed to serve. But now, he saw things through a new lens. He realized that everyone had their own story, their own struggles, and it wasn't his job to judge them based on his assumptions. The mall had always been a busy, bustling place, full of people coming and going, each with their own agenda. But Jake had started to notice the little things. The way some people avoided eye contact, the way others held their heads down, the way kids like Malik, who had once been an easy target for judgment, carried themselves with a quiet confidence that Jake now understood wasn't arrogance, but something earned through resilience. One afternoon, Jake was walking through the clothing section of the mall when he saw Malik again. The teenager was standing near a display, looking at a jacket surrounded by his friends. This time, Jake didn't hesitate. He didn't wonder if he should approach or if it would be awkward. He just walked over calmly, with the same level of respect he would give to anyone. "Hey, Malik," he said, making sure his tone was casual. "How's it going?" Malik turned to him, and for a moment, their eyes met. No tension, no awkwardness. Just a brief moment of acknowledgement. "Hey, Jake," Malik replied, giving him a small nod. "All good, just checking out this jacket, for winter." Jake smiled, relieved at the easygoing nature of their interaction. "Looks like a good choice. You got a good eye." Malik chuckled. "I try," he said, then almost unexpectedly added, "Thanks for what you said the other day. I know it's not easy to admit when you're wrong." Jake's smile faded slightly, replaced by a deeper sincerity. "I meant it," he said. "I don't want to be that guy anymore, the one who judges people based on the way they look or what they assume. I've been doing a lot of thinking about it." Malik nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's cool. We all have our moments. I think you're doing all right. Just keep it up." Jake didn't know why, but hearing Malik say that felt like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. It wasn't the grand gesture of forgiveness that he had been expecting, but it was enough. For Malik and for Jake, that was all that mattered. The tension that had once been between them was gone. It was replaced with understanding, mutual understanding, that they were both flawed, but both trying to do better. Before Jake could say anything else, Malik's friends called for him to come over. They were ready to head out. "I'll catch you later, Jake," Malik said, a friendly wave in his direction. "Take care." Jake watched him walk away, a feeling of quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. He had done what he needed to do. He had apologized, taken responsibility, and now, the distance between him and Malik felt smaller. The walls that had once been built by assumption and prejudice crumbling bit by bit. As he continued his rounds through the mall, Jake reflected on everything that had happened. The mistake he had made still stung, but it was no longer a source of shame. Instead, it had become a lesson, one he wouldn't forget. And maybe, just maybe, it had made him a better person in the process. Things at the mall weren't perfect, and Jake knew that he still had work to do. But now, when he interacted with others, whether it was with a shopper, a colleague, or even someone like Malik, he made a conscious effort to see them, to look past what he assumed about them and recognize their humanity, just as he hoped they would do for him. The mall, in a way, had become a reflection of that journey. It was still filled with the usual noise and bustle of everyday life. But now, every face Jake saw was a reminder that the world wasn't so simple. Everyone had a story, a struggle, something that made them who they were. And he wasn't about to judge them based on the way they looked, or the assumptions he made. It wasn't just about doing his job anymore. It was about doing it right with respect, and understanding that no one was a stranger in the way he once thought they were. As Jake left the mall that evening, he felt lighter. The weight he'd been carrying for so long had finally started to lift, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally starting to become the person he wanted to be. A few weeks passed, and Jake found himself falling into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. He still had his moments of doubt, moments when he wondered if he was really changing, or if he was just pretending to be someone he wasn't. But whenever he caught himself thinking like that, he reminded himself that change was never instant. It was a process. And as long as he kept moving forward, even just a little bit, he was on the right track. Then one afternoon, Jake was pulled aside by Mr. Mitchell for a quick chat. He knew something was up when his supervisor looked a little more serious than usual. "Jake, there's a situation we need to talk about," Mr. Mitchell said, gesturing for him to sit down. "It's about Malik." Jake felt a jolt of panic shoot through him. Was Malik in trouble? Had he done something wrong? The last thing he wanted was for the fragile peace he'd built with the teenager to shatter. But Mr. Mitchell's expression didn't change, and Jake forced himself to breathe, waiting for what would come next. "It's nothing like that," Mr. Mitchell continued, as if reading Jake's thoughts. "In fact, it's kind of the opposite. Mr. Johnson wanted me to pass along a message to you. He said that he's been impressed with how you've been handling things lately, especially with Malik." Jake blinked, stunned. "Wait, what? Mr. Johnson, impressed with me?" Mr. Mitchell nodded. "Yeah, he said you've been showing a lot of growth. Malik's noticed too. They've been talking, and Mr. Johnson told me he appreciates how you've been treating his son. He's even said you've helped improve the atmosphere around here." Jake was at a loss for words. This wasn't what he had expected. Mr. Johnson, the very man he had embarrassed and let down so many weeks ago, was actually saying something positive about him. It felt surreal, but at the same time it also felt like validation. Proof that he hadn't just been fooling himself about the changes he was trying to make. I'm shocked," Jake admitted, still trying to process the news. "I didn't think I'd ever get to a point where he'd even consider saying something like that to me." Mr. Mitchell smiled faintly. "Well, you've put in the work, Jake, and people notice when you make an effort. Malik's father might be tough, but he's fair, and when he sees real change, he acknowledges it. And Malik, well, he's the one who told Mr. Johnson that you've been fair to him since the incident. That says something." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. That was the moment when he realized something important. He hadn't just fixed his relationship with Mr. Johnson or Malik. He had fixed something in himself. He had shown, through his actions, that people could grow, that mistakes didn't have to define them. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about striving to do better. "I'm glad to hear that," Jake said finally, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. "I've been trying to do better, to learn from what happened. I didn't want to let it be something that defined me in the wrong way." "You've done that, Jake," Mr. Mitchell said, giving him an approving nod. "And it's not just about Malik. It's about how you've been carrying yourself around here. People are starting to notice. So, just keep doing what you're doing." The next few days were a blur for Jake. He felt lighter, more confident in the way he interacted with the people around him. But the biggest shift was in the way he carried himself. It wasn't just about apologizing for his mistakes anymore. It was about actively working to make sure he didn't make them again. He listened more. He thought before he spoke, and he treated everyone with a level of respect that he hadn't always given in the past. It was during a routine shift later that week when Jake had another unexpected encounter with Malik. The teenager was standing near the entrance talking to a friend when he caught sight of Jake. Instead of looking away, like he might have done in the past, Malik walked over with a smile. "Hey, Jake," he said casually. "I just wanted to say, I appreciate everything you've been doing, since everything happened." Jake was taken aback. He had expected some kind of acknowledgement, but hearing it from Malik felt different. He had been waiting for this moment, wondering when or if they would ever speak openly again about what happened. And here it was, as natural as could be. "Thanks, Malik," Jake said, his voice sincere. "I've been working hard to show that I can do better. I know I messed up, but I don't want to be that guy anymore." Malik nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I get it. I think it's good that you're trying to make things right. A lot of people wouldn't even do that." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't felt before. "Well, I'm not perfect, but I'm learning." Malik laughed softly. "Yeah, we all are. But you've definitely come a long way. I'm glad you're not just letting that mistake stick with you." Jake could feel the weight of Malik's words, the sincerity behind them. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was understanding. An understanding that was slowly growing between them. Jake had taken the first step, but Malik was showing him that it wasn't just about an apology or a change in behavior. It was about building trust, about showing that change wasn't temporary. It was something that lasted. As Malik waved goodbye and walked back to his group of friends, Jake stood there for a moment, letting the realization sink in. He had done the right thing, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was becoming the man he always hoped he could be. As the weeks passed, Jake felt a gradual shift not just in how he saw others, but in how others saw him. The interactions around the mall felt different now. The weight of his past mistakes still lingered, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a reminder, a lesson he carried with him. His efforts to change were starting to show, and for the first time Jake didn't feel like he was just playing the part of someone trying to make things right. He actually was trying, and it was working. One afternoon, as Jake made his usual rounds near the mall's main entrance, he spotted Malik again. This time, however, the teenager was alone, looking at a kiosk that sold phone accessories. He wasn't in a rush, and he didn't look like he was going anywhere. For a moment, Jake hesitated. Their last few conversations had been positive, but this one felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it seemed like an opportunity for something more. Something beyond the usual, "Hey, how's it going?" Jake took a deep breath and walked up to Malik, making sure to keep his distance, respecting the teenager's space. "Hey, Malik," he said, his voice steady but friendly. Malik looked up and, to Jake's surprise, smiled. "Oh, hey, Jake," he said, his tone relaxed. "What's up?" Jake felt his heart rate slow down. This was it. He had a chance to continue making amends, to further build the understanding they had started to develop. "I was just thinking," Jake started, his words coming out a little more carefully than usual. "You know, about how I treated you a while back. I wanted to thank you again for how you've been. You didn't have to forgive me or even talk to me again. But you did. I really respect that." Malik seemed to consider this for a moment, then shrugged. "I mean, it's not like I had much of a choice, right? You messed up, but we all do. Besides, I know you've been trying to make things right. Not everyone would do that." Jake's chest tightened slightly at Malik's words. It wasn't just forgiveness he was hearing. It was understanding. Malik wasn't just letting the past go. He was acknowledging Jake's efforts, validating that change wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about proving it through actions. "I've been trying," Jake said, his voice softer now. "I know it doesn't fix everything, but I hope it's making a difference, and I really appreciate you giving me a chance." Malik gave a slight nod, his gaze thoughtful. "I think it's making a difference," he said quietly. "And I see that. But I guess you're right. It's not just about saying sorry. It's about proving it." Jake smiled, relieved and grateful. The distance between them had shrunk, and what had started as a tense and uncomfortable situation was now something built on mutual respect. "I'm glad you feel that way." For a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. No words were needed. Jake wasn't sure what had clicked or why, but it felt like a moment of real connection, the kind he had been hoping for since everything had gone down. He wasn't just the security guard anymore. He wasn't the guy who had made a huge mistake. He was Jake, someone who had learned, someone who was trying to be better. And Malik, the teenager he had judged too quickly, had become someone he could genuinely respect. "Well," Malik said, breaking the silence, "I should get going. Got some errands to run. But, I'll see you around, Jake." Jake nodded, a genuine smile on his face. "Take care, Malik, and thanks again." Malik waved and walked away, blending into the crowd, his casual stride a reminder of how far they'd both come since that day in the mall. As Jake stood there watching him go, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just the conversation or the fact that Malik had forgiven him. It was the realization that he had finally earned that forgiveness. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It hadn't been easy, but it had been real. Every step, every awkward conversation, every mistake had led to this moment, where he could look at Malik not just as the son of the mall owner, but as someone he had truly come to understand. And in a way, the lesson wasn't just about treating people better. It was about seeing them for who they truly were, and not letting assumptions or prejudices cloud that vision. As Jake continued his shift that day, he felt something shift within him once more. It wasn't about getting things perfect, about erasing the past. It was about the ongoing work, the work that would never end but was always worth doing. Every encounter, every decision was an opportunity to prove that he could be better, to prove that people could change. And as the mall bustled around him, Jake felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't perfect, but for once, he was okay with that. As the weeks turned into months, Jake began to feel a sense of stability in his life that he hadn't experienced before. The changes he had made, both in his actions and in his attitude, weren't fleeting. They had become part of who he was. It wasn't just about Malik anymore, or even the fallout with Mr. Johnson. It was about living his life in a way that reflected the respect he had promised to uphold, not just in his job, but in every interaction he had. One afternoon, during a particularly quiet shift, Jake was walking near the mall's east entrance when he saw Mr. Johnson standing just outside a store, talking to a group of potential tenants for the mall's newer retail spaces. Jake froze for a moment. The last time he had seen Mr. Johnson up close, it had been in a tense office meeting. But now, the man seemed calm and relaxed, handling the conversation with ease and confidence. It was hard not to feel a little intimidated by his presence, but Jake was also grateful for the chance to finally feel like he was seeing the man as more than just the owner. As Jake approached the entrance, Mr. Johnson caught sight of him and waved him over. Jake hesitated, his nerves coming back for a split second, but he straightened his posture and walked over. "Jake, good to see you," Mr. Johnson said with a nod. His voice was warm, almost like an old friend. It caught Jake off guard. He had expected something more formal, especially considering how their relationship had started. "Mr. Johnson," Jake greeted him, giving a respectful nod. "How's it going?" "Going well. Going well," Mr. Johnson replied with a smile. "I'm just showing some new folks around, but I wanted to take a minute and talk to you." He glanced briefly at the tenants before turning back to Jake. "I've noticed how things have been going here lately. I've been hearing good things." Jake felt a flutter of anxiety. Good things? What did that mean? Was he in trouble? Or was Mr. Johnson about to tell him he had made some sort of mistake again? "I wanted to tell you that I've seen real growth in you, Jake," Mr. Johnson continued, reading his expression. "Not just with Malik, but overall. You've really stepped up, and you've made a difference. You've got a good head on your shoulders, and people have noticed. I respect that." Jake's stomach did a flip. He was surprised, almost too surprised to respond. "Thank you, sir," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've been working hard to do better. I know I've made mistakes in the past, but I'm trying to make things right." Mr. Johnson nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I can tell. It's one thing to say you'll change, but it's another to actually follow through. I've seen you do that. That's why I'm offering you a bit more responsibility around here." Jake blinked, not quite understanding. "More responsibility?" "Yeah," Mr. Johnson said with a small smile. "I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to offer you a promotion. There's an opening for a head security position. You've proven you're trustworthy, and you've got a good handle on things. You've earned it." Jake stood there, stunned for what felt like an eternity. Promotion. He couldn't believe it. The weight of it hit him all at once. A promotion meant more than just a higher position. It meant that the work he had put into becoming a better person, a better professional, had been seen and recognized. He wasn't just the guy who had made a mistake anymore. He was someone who had been trusted with more. "Wow," Jake said, still processing the words. "I don't know what to say. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. This means a lot to me, really." Mr. Johnson gave him a firm handshake. "You've earned it, Jake. Keep doing what you're doing. And don't forget the lessons you've learned along the way. People will respect you, as long as you respect them." As Jake walked away from the conversation, the weight of Mr. Johnson's words lingered in his mind. It wasn't just the promotion that was important. It was the fact that he had earned it, through his actions and his efforts to become better. In some ways, it felt like a full circle moment, the culmination of everything he had been working toward. He had spent so much of his life thinking he needed to hide his flaws, avoid his mistakes. But now, he knew that mistakes didn't define him. They were just part of the process. The way he chose to learn from them, to rise above them, was what truly mattered. Later that day, after his shift ended, Jake stood outside the mall, taking a deep breath. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the parking lot. He had come so far. He thought about how different he felt from the man who had made that snap judgment about Malik all those months ago. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally on the right path. Jake had always believed that change was hard, that it was something you could only hope for, but never quite reach. But now he understood that it wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, about striving to be better, to be kinder, to be more understanding. It was about showing up every day and doing your best, even when the world around you didn't make it easy. And for Jake, that was enough. Because he wasn't just a security guard anymore. He was someone who had worked through his mistakes, who had learned, who had earned the trust and respect of the people around him. And that was worth more than anything else. As he walked to his car, Jake couldn't help but smile. He had done it. He had truly done it. The days following Jake's promotion were a blur of new responsibilities and challenges. The head security position wasn't just about overseeing the team and managing the day-to-day logistics of the mall's security. It was about being a leader, someone others could rely on, someone who had the judgment and respect of the people around him. Jake wasn't just responsible for the safety of the mall anymore. He was responsible for ensuring that his team operated with the same level of fairness and respect that he had learned to embody. At first, the adjustment was a bit overwhelming. Jake had never been the leader type. He was more comfortable working behind the scenes, taking care of the tasks that needed to get done without drawing attention. But as he stepped into the role, he began to realize that leadership wasn't about having all the answers or being the loudest voice in the room. It was about listening, really listening, to the people around him. It was about fostering a culture where respect wasn't just expected, but given freely. Jake's first big test came a few weeks after he took the promotion. There had been some complaints about one of the new security hires, a young guy named Kyle. Kyle had been caught making some offhanded comments about a group of shoppers, and there were whispers around the mall that he wasn't treating people the way they should be treated. Jake knew that this was his chance to put everything he had learned into practice. He couldn't just let it slide. He had to address it, but he also knew that he needed to handle it in a way that reflected the values he had adopted since that fateful day with Malik. Jake called Kyle into his office one afternoon, his heart pounding slightly. He wasn't sure what kind of reaction he was going to get, but he knew this was a defining moment. As Kyle walked in, Jake gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Kyle. We need to talk." Kyle hesitated for a second, but then took a seat. "What's up, boss?" Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "I've been hearing some concerns about the way you've been treating some of the customers here. I know you've only been with us a short time, but I need to address it before it becomes a bigger problem." Kyle's face shifted for a moment, and Jake could see him getting defensive. "What do you mean? I haven't done anything wrong. People are just too sensitive these days." Jake's heart sank, but he stayed calm. "I don't think it's about being sensitive, Kyle. It's about respect. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to feel safe, welcomed, and respected. And the moment we stop seeing people that way, we stop doing our job right. Do you understand?" Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Yeah, I get it. But sometimes people they don't act the way they should, you know? Like, they act like they own the place or whatever." Jake leaned forward, keeping his voice steady but firm. "That's the thing, Kyle. It's not about who they are or how they act. It's about how we respond. We don't get to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. We treat everyone with respect. No exceptions. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but I am asking you to do your job with dignity. And that starts with treating people right." There was a long pause. Kyle shifted in his seat again, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, I get it. I'll do better. I didn't realize it was that serious." Jake nodded, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. He knew this wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. "I know you can do better, Kyle. Just remember, we lead by example. Our job is to keep this mall safe, sure, but it's also to create an environment where people feel comfortable and respected. Can you do that?" Kyle met his eyes for a moment before answering. "Yeah, I can do that." Jake exhaled, relieved. "Good. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again." As Kyle left the office, Jake sat back in his chair, his thoughts spinning. This was the hardest part of leadership. The difficult conversations, the uncomfortable moments where you had to address things head on. But it was also the most rewarding, He had seen firsthand how small actions, small changes, could lead to big differences. And today, Kyle had taken a small step toward understanding what it meant to treat others with respect, even when it was hard. Jake couldn't help but think back to his own journey. How far he had come. He had made mistakes, sure, but he had learned. And in a way, this moment felt like a full-circle realization. He wasn't the same person who had rushed to judgment about Malik. He wasn't the person who had been so quick to assume the worst about others. He was someone who understood the power of respect, of empathy, of seeing people for who they truly were. As Jake left the office later that day, he passed Malik once again in the food court. The teenager was sitting with his friends, laughing and joking with the ease of someone who had found their place in the world. Malik caught Jake's eye for a moment, offering a brief but genuine smile before going back to his conversation. Jake smiled back, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. It wasn't just the promotion, the job, or the recognition. It was the realization that he had become someone who was making a real difference, not just in his work, but in how he viewed the world around him. The holiday season was approaching, and with it came the usual hustle and bustle of the mall. The stores were filled with shoppers hunting for gifts, the food court was packed with families, and the entire place seemed to hum with the energy of people eager to get things done. For Jake, it was a familiar chaos, one he had navigated countless times before. But this year, there was something different. This year, he wasn't just a security guard trying to keep things in order. He was a leader, someone who was helping shape the environment of the mall, ensuring it stayed safe, yes, but also welcoming, inclusive, and respectful. As the weeks went by, Jake found that his role had evolved in ways he hadn't expected. He wasn't just overseeing security protocols anymore. He was actively working with his team, teaching them the same lessons he had learned: how to stay calm in stressful situations, how to de-escalate conflicts, how to treat every person with dignity and respect. He had even started running weekly team meetings, talking through challenges and sharing his experiences. His team began to look to him not just for direction but for guidance, and Jake realized that he wasn't just teaching them security procedures, he was teaching them about empathy. One evening, as Jake was wrapping up his shift, he overheard a conversation between two of his team members. They were discussing a situation from earlier in the day where a shopper had become upset after a mix-up with a return. One of the officers, an older man named Tom, had handled the situation calmly and respectfully, managing to diffuse the tension without escalating things. "That's the kind of stuff we need to do more of," Jake overheard Tom saying to his partner, a newer guard named Sarah. "I remember when I first started, I'd have just gone straight into follow the rules mode. But Jake's really changed my perspective. You've got to read the situation, not just follow the book. People appreciate that." Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I've learned a lot from him too. I'm trying to be more patient, more understanding when things go sideways. It's not always easy, but I get why it's important." Jake stood there, just out of sight, listening to their conversation. A sense of pride washed over him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger. His efforts were starting to ripple outward, influencing how others saw their jobs, how they treated the people around them. He had helped create a culture where empathy and respect weren't just ideals, they were part of everyday practice. As the shift came to an end, Jake walked out into the cold evening air, the chill a sharp contrast to the warmth of the mall behind him. He had come a long way from the man who had made a snap judgment about Malik that day. He wasn't perfect. He'd never be perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. The job, the team, the mall, it all felt like it was part of something bigger now, something more meaningful. Jake wasn't just doing his job, he was building something. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the year drew to a close, Jake stood outside the mall one crisp evening, looking at the holiday lights that decorated the building. The mall was bustling with